We're joined today by Ximena Griscti. She's a bilingual grant writer and consultant who works with artists, academics, and a lot of community-based leaders. Her work aspires to break down the barriers and make grant writing accessible to everybody. She's an urban composter herself. She's a gardener committed to supporting sustainable practices towards minimal waste, and she has written successful grants for community composters, Ashland Community Composting in Oregon. Today, Ximena will be providing an overview of grant writing itself. The presentation today will include exercises, so you'll get to work with a few partners. They're not going to really be breakout sessions. We don't have breakout rooms, but we are going to be using a group whiteboard where we can post sticky notes and add thoughts. And actually work through some of the key components in writing styles today.
So thank you, Courtney, for the introduction, and thank you, California Alliance for Community Composting for hosting, and thank you to the funders, CalRecycle, the Greenhouse Gases Reduction Fund, and California Climate Investments. So a little bit about me. My background is in literature and cultural studies. I do a lot of writing. I'm a grant writer for artists, academics, and community leaders, as Courtney mentioned. And I'm also a grant writer for Ashland Community Composting, which is a small Oregon-based organization who I've been working with from its inception. And I've helped them secure their first grant and also subsequent grants. So in this workshop, we're going to be looking at how to get started. And for those of you who have experience with grant writing, we're going to provide you with some additional skills and perspectives to think about. So just a general overview of the workshop. We're going to start from the very basics. What is a grant application? And we're going to move through a few steps about getting ready to apply for your grant. And then we're going to have a look at the California Grassroots Environmental Fund, which is a wonderful grant from the Rose Foundation. So the goals for this workshop are to prepare new applicants for their first application. And for those of you who have more experience, it's to provide just additional tools and resources for your subsequent applications. So from the very basics, what is a grant application? And I think it's important to remember this. It's important to remember that funders want to give money for want to support projects and organizations, but not just any organization. They want to support organizations that are aligned with their mission statement and values. So when you're thinking about a grant and you're thinking about your proposal, you're going to always keep in mind what the grantor wants to support. And the way that you're going to write is going to be a way you're going to be convincing the funder that supporting you is going to help them further their mission. Grant writing is a non-linear process, and I think it's really important to remember this. When we look at finished applications, submitted applications, they look very tidy. And what I mean by that is that we see a question and then an answer, and then another question and then an answer. And it looks very linear. However, the grant writing is never linear. And I think it's important to point this out because a lot of people, when they start writing their grant, it can be overwhelming. And even for me, I wrote my first grant about 15 years ago. And even today, when I start writing grants, There's always, a bit of a haze, a bit of confusion, uncertainty. But then, you keep going, you trust the process, don't give up, and give yourself lots and lots and lots of time. So there's certain steps for getting grant ready, right? Certain preliminary steps that you can take beforehand to get ready to write not just a particular grant, but just grants in general. And we're going to go over all these steps. This is kind of a summary checklist that I made, but we're going to go over each one of these steps in detail. So the first step is the mission statement, writing a mission statement. So what is a mission statement? A mission statement is a couple of sentences or a short paragraph that talks about who you are, what you do, how do you do it, and what is the impact? Why does it matter? And here I included two different mission statements. I included the first mission statement that Ashland Community Composting provided to me, and then the way that I edited it. And I'm just going to take a little bit of time to read the rough draft. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the editing process and how I edited it. So Ashland Community Composting wants residential and commercial kitchen food waste that currently goes to landfills. Composting the town's food waste reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it produces carbon sequestering compost, which creates fertility and growth for local gardens, grasslands, and agriculture, while reducing landfill biomass and chemical fertilizer dependency. There's a lot of great information there. However, in my opinion, it seems very heavy, it seems very wordy, and it seems difficult to read, especially for somebody who is not an expert or has very little experience or no experience with composting and composting projects. So the first thing that I noticed when I was given this rough draft to edit was the word wants. And the word wants to me was the first thing that popped up because it's very vague. It's a word that's very vague. It's a word that doesn't, you can want something, right? I can want a vacation on the beach, for example, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna do anything about it. It doesn't give a sense of commitment that we want to convey in our mission statement. So the way that I edited it, I'm just going to read the first sentence. So Ashland Community Composting is a grassroots initiative committed to diverting food waste away from landfills to create living compost. So in that first sentence, I'm already answering the first two questions. And at the very top, I'm already answering, who are you and what do you do? And I'm answering, how do you do it? And when I read it out loud, it feels like it flows. It doesn't feel clunky. It's easy to understand. So then the other thing to look at is the impact. And that comes in the second sentence. So we provide rich, high-quality soil to farmers and growers while reducing landfill biomass, toxic chemical use, and sequestering carbon from the environment. So again, it's easy to read, it's clear, it's concise, and it pretty much contains all of the information that's contained in the first paragraph, but the information is packed in with keywords. The only information that maybe is different is the first paragraph talks about greenhouse gas emissions. I could have included that. I could have replaced, one of these points, like reducing landfill biomass with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's a personal choice. So it's going to depend on you and the way that it feels that it flows more and that it's more concise. And this is the choice that I made for this. And also it can always be changed in the future. It can always be adjusted. So I want to start here with our first exercise, which is, having a look at your mission statement. So if you don't have a mission statement already, maybe you can start thinking about writing your first draft with those 3 questions that are at the top. And if you do have a mission statement already, maybe you can take a look at the language you're using, and you can start by reading it in your head, but with a voice in your head, and think about how it flows, if it flows. Is there information that can be more concise? Is there a word that can be more powerful, like using the word committed instead of the word wants? So I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, to take a look at your mission statement. And if you have any comments or anything you want to share with the group, just put it in the chat. So let's start with that.
And if anyone's feeling brave enough to put it in the chat, we can use you as an example. I did put CAC's mission statement in there as an example. And if you do put one in the chat, we can copy and paste it over to the whiteboard later.
Yeah, and also if you want to share any changes that you've made in your editing, feel free as well to share it in the chat, and it can help everybody. No problem. We'll continue. Another thing that's very useful when preparing materials to get ready to write for grants is writing boilerplate text. So writing text that with slight modifications, they can be recycled and applied to several grants. So for example, you're going to want to write a couple of paragraphs, 1 or 2 paragraphs about your organization's history, 1 or 2 paragraphs about your programs, their objectives, the populations they serve. You're going to want to write about the community, why you're running your programs, what impact do they have, why do your programs matter, why are they needed, who else is running similar programs to you, and what are they doing, and where do you fit in this larger picture? So all of this is very, very useful preliminary work for grant writing in general. You can think of it as shelving units, and then you have tools, on the shelves that you can take as you need and modify as you need. So I've identified 3 potential areas of focus for community composters. And I just, they're very broad categories. They're very porous categories. And I think that the porousness of the categories are their strength. So the three categories are environment and climate change. So very broad category. And then I added a few points that could fit into the categories for community composters. Reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions, making soil more drought tolerant, increasing soil biodiversity. The second category is community engagement and education. And the third category is equity and health. So, like I mentioned earlier, these categories are very porous. So, for example, the first one, under environment and climate change, reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emission, I could have easily put that under equity and health. The same, making soil more drought tolerant, I could have easily put that under education. I could have easily put that also under health. So these are three very broad categories. And I encourage you to think a little bit more about how your mission statement and your projects could fit into these categories and how they can overlap between categories, and to focus on that overlap. So we're going to have another little exercise. This one's going to be maybe we can take about 10 minutes to think about how and what you can add to these categories. And also, if you come up with another category that you think that should be added, that can be very useful too. And I'm going to propose in the chat right now, I'm going to propose this resource from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And it's a very excellent guide. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to screen share. Here we go. So this is a very excellent resource that can give you ideas and language to use for your grant applications, and to think about this preliminary writing that you're going to do to prepare yourself to think about writing grants. So I'm just going to go over it very, very quickly. There's the introduction, very broad introduction, information on climate action plans and how to approach them for community composters, opportunities and strategies. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly, and then I'm going to give you a bit of time to look at it yourself. Comprehensive climate action plans. So approaches that you could take using kind of grant language. So you already know what you're doing. You already know, you're already in touch with your communities. You already know that your programs are important, but you have to convince the funders. And this resource is providing you language that they understand, language that they want to hear, keywords that will resonate with them. To help you convince them that you will further their mission. So, for example, on page 6, we have these strategic considerations, and you can look at these when you're working on adding to those categories. And also, there's a language that you can, and what I love about this resource is that you can copy and paste directly from this text. I recommend that if you are copying and pasting word for word, that you have it in quotation marks and you cite the source. And not just for legal reasons, but citing the source is also, backs you up, right? You're not just saying something to the funder. that, could be something that you came up with spontaneously. You have this research that's backing you up. So there's different approaches, and here you can see a list that will be useful. And then there's these graphs, visuals, which can be extremely helpful. And for those of you who are taking a climate approach, here are some statements that you can use. Every one of them is backed up with a reliable source. And then there's different angles that you can take. And this is going to be useful because when you're applying for different grants from different funders, you're going to see what their priorities are, and you're going to be able to choose which angle you want to approach the grant from. There's also that intersectionality that I was talking about, those porous categories that, that the points that go across the categories, right? So there's climate and community, climate and equity. So you have all this information here. And I would like you have the link in the chat. And I'd like you to have a good look at this document and maybe take a few minutes to see if and how you can add to these three categories in a way that is relevant to your organization and the projects that you're working on. So, Courtney, if you wouldn't mind starting the whiteboard. So the activity is to take a look at the resource that I sent. I'm just going to paste it here again, just so it's the most recent thing on the chat. So take a look at the chat. Take a look at the link that I just shared. Follow that link and have a look. You can start on page 5 and have a quick look and see if there's any information there that is relevant to your organizations or the projects that you're working on, and think about which one of these categories or shelving units or buckets, which one of these you could add information to. And then you're going to have this resource as part of your grant readiness. Does anybody have any questions, or should I elaborate? Is it clear? Yeah. So for example, thank you, Bianca, for the question. For example, here's one of, oops. Okay. Under environment and climate change, reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions. So as a community composter, my project, my organization, how does it contribute towards the environment and climate change and fighting climate change? Well, composting reduces landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions. Composting makes soil more drought tolerant. Composting increases soil diversity. So what else can you think of? And as I was mentioning earlier, these categories are very porous, right? So reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions, I could put it under environment and climate change, or I could put it under equity and health. And if there's another category that you would find relevant for your projects, or that you think, that I should have included, please feel free to add that as well. We are welcome we are doing an exercise. We have about a minute left where I provided these three broad and porous categories. And I also provided, if you look on the chat, there's a link that I sent to a wonderful document from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And you can open that document, or you can just write things that that you are already thinking about, and try to add to this list, to these three categories, how your composting projects or how your organization contributes to these broad categories. Does that make sense? So for example, we have the environment climate change category, and one point is reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions, making soil more drought tolerant. And as I mentioned earlier, these categories are porous, so I could have easily put reducing landfill mass and greenhouse gas emissions also under equity and health. Okay, so obviously, this is an ongoing exercise. We're just took a couple of minutes here to do it, but I encourage you, after this workshop is over, I encourage you to focus on these three different shelving units and try to write as much as you can. And you can write about impact, like what we've been doing here. And you can also, from that document that I shared, or from the EPA, or from whatever other resource that you want, you can also state facts. So impact and facts, and then have those as something that you're going to be using, you're going to be going back to later. One of my first slides talked about how grant writing is not a linear process. So a lot of this preliminary work that we're doing may seem random and unrelated, but then you'll see how it all ends up coming together at the end. And this kind of text as well is going to give you a head start when you're writing different grant applications, right? So if you're writing an application from a funder that focuses heavily on the environment and climate change, you're gonna really focus on your resources, on the facts, and on the impact from that category. But you're also going to find the porousness, right? So you're going to approach it from an environmental climate change perspective. And at the same time, you're going to emphasize that this is not only an environmental issue, this also contributes towards health. This also contributes towards equity. And if you're the same, if your funder is, offering education grants or community grants, it's that middle category that you're going to be focusing on, and you're going to connect it with the two other ones. I think these three categories further any funder, any funding body that community composters would be applying to. It's just, where do you place the most focus? So maybe we can take a little bit of time to, if people want to share, if people want to talk about what they wrote, and maybe if they want to talk about why they put it in a certain category, and maybe they'll want to talk about, oh, I chose to put it in this category, but I actually could have also put it in this other category, how they connect. Does anybody want to share what they wrote and why they wrote it?
And just a reminder, you can feel free to popcorn out or you can raise your hand, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Okay. There's some great things here. I love this one. I'm looking at this one. They'll create environments for young students to learn early about the many values of composting. And that is incredibly important. And it can fit into any one of those categories. It could fit into the education category. It could fit into the equity category. It could fit into the health category. I mean, especially young people and students who are some of them are so overwhelmed with, the idea of climate change and the dangers of climate change. And a lot of young people feel, yeah, overwhelmed, and engaging in something like community composting is not only contributing and fighting against climate change, but it's also builds community, and it's good for their mental health, knowing that they can take these matters into their own hands and contribute directly. So mental health, I think, is really important, especially when we talk about students and youth, and engaging youth with composting and changing habits, right? I see it here. Promotes behavior changes for waste reduction and conscious consumerism. It's very important. And then they're all interconnected. So if anybody wants to share something, I'm just going to read it's on the chat. It's beautiful. All right. So I encourage you again to keep working on these categories, shelving units, whatever you want to call them, after the workshop. It not only helps you think about perspective, but it also provides written materials for the specific grants that you're applying for. So we're going to move on. Is that okay, or do people need a couple more minutes, or is it okay to move on? If you need a couple of more minutes, please let me know. Yes, the chat history is going to be sent to everybody. The whiteboard is also going to be sent to everybody. And the slides are going to be sent to everybody as well. Okay, so a little bit more on getting ready to apply for grants. And the boilerplate text that we were talking about earlier. So a list of materials that you've written already, and when it comes time to write the grant, you already have all this work done, and you can just focus on the specific grant. So something else that you can start working on now that's going to be useful for the future, you're going to have a list of your alliances, linkages, partnerships, letters, and details on that. If you're applying for project grants, you're going to think about costs, but you're going to just estimate the cost, and your budget at this point needs to be flexible and adaptable. Don't spend too much time until the very end, until you're actually writing the grant. Just have a rough idea of a flexible costs of your budget, of your project. You're going to need to get 501(c)(3) tax exempt status, either through fiscal sponsorship or by applying directly to the IRS. There's this amazing source, amazing link from the Sustainable Economies Law Center on fiscal sponsorship. It's a short video. There's the link. Again, you're going to have these slides, and all the links that I've included in the slides you're going to be able to just click on the link and follow them. So just a very brief overview. Fiscal sponsorship can be really useful for organizations that are just starting out. So the fiscal sponsor can take care of, it'll depend on the agreement, right, that you have with the fiscal sponsor, but usually they'll take care of the books and a lot of administrative, administrative stuff, bureaucratic stuff. So for organizations that are just starting out, having a fiscal sponsor allows them to focus, put all their focus on their project. And there's a few fiscal sponsors that I wanted to highlight. There's the Ecology Center, which, if I'm not mistaken, what they require is for an organization to have a fundraising plan to raise, I think, $20,000. But they also say that they make exceptions and to write to them. So this one is perfect for organizations that are just starting out, or for organizations that have, a budget that is smaller than $20,000. There's also the Rose Foundation, and we're gonna have a good look at them later. And they require a fundraising plan to raise $50,000 minimum. So, it's a little mid-tier. And then there's a directory, there's a link to a directory for you if neither of these is a good fit for you and your organization. You can take a look at this fiscal sponsor directory under the category of environment and sustainable growth, and you can search for one that is a good fit for you. Okay, I think we're not going to take the 2 minutes. Maybe if we have time at the end, but I just want to move forward. So finding a funder, this is a tricky part. When you're looking for a funder, you're gonna look for a funder with aligned missions and values. So you're gonna use the mission statement that you wrote. You're gonna use those 3 categories that we worked on earlier, and you can start with that for your search. Now, I did some preliminary research, and what I started was just a simple Google search, community composting grants, California. So very basic, very clear. And with that, I got a lot of results pointing to EPA grants, which were pretty significant awards, so not a lot of small awards. So then I modified my search to small environmental grants, California. And then there were a few there that looked interesting. I followed all the results that seemed like a good fit. And then I found the California Environmental Grassroots Fund from the Rose Foundation, which is I found to be absolutely perfect for this workshop. And we're going to be focusing on that grant, and we're going to be looking at it very closely. But that's how I found it. And then once I was on the Rose Foundation's website, I was able to see other grants that they administered, and I was able to find other ones that could be relevant. And then also their funding partners. So once you're in a site or in a you found a lead, you can follow that lead and you can find other relevant opportunities. So finding a funder. You're going to look very, very closely at eligibility. You don't want to start writing a grant only to find out after that you're not eligible. Again, remember that these foundations want to give you money. So if you have any questions, there's people there that are going to want to talk to you. I know that sometimes writing or cold calling is a little, can be a little intimidating, but remember that these people want to fund you. Make sure the grant is still being awarded. A lot of grants I found that looked amazing. When I took a closer look, I realized that they were, the last time they were awarded was in 2019, right? So make sure it's still being awarded. The Rose Foundation grant that I'm going to be using as an example, I actually wrote to the Rose Foundation to make sure that that grant was still being awarded. So be sure and look for projects that have been funded in the past. And this is important, on the one hand, to give you an idea of what kind of projects they like to fund. And on the other hand, you can see if they have funded a project that's very similar to yours recently. And if so, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to modify your approach a little bit? Maybe it's an opportunity to write to the funder to ask them if if they would accept a proposal for a similar project. So remember to keep communication open, to write to them with any questions. All right. And then we're going to get ready to think about the proposal. So you have all your preliminary material, you have the boilerplate, you have the boilerplate text, you have you found the perfect funder. So then you're gonna really, really scrutinize their website. You're gonna read, reread, and I could have written reread 100 more times because you really, really, really want to look closely at who they are and what they want to fund. You're going to look at their website, their mission statement, their partnerships, alliances, everything you possibly can. You're going to try to learn as much as you can about the funder, because then you're going to want to put yourself in their shoes to think about your project. And that's going to give you an idea of how to approach the writing, and what to write about. So I made this little graph where we have your mission statement and your project, and then those three categories that you elaborated on. And then we have the grantor's mission statement, the grant, and then what kind of projects and who they want to fund. And you want to align those as much as you possibly can. And the way that you're going to align those is with these things here that are in the with the red arrows, right? So that is how you're going to align the two, and you're going to convince the funder that your project is going to further their mission. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Something else that you're going to think about is perspective. So you have your mission statement, and then you're going to think about greater goals, right? You're going to think about goals that you can't attain with a single project, but rather greater goals that all the projects that you're going to be elaborating are going to be working towards this greater goal. Your project is going to be situated somewhere in the middle there. So, for example, you have your mission statement, which, as we talked about earlier, is the purpose of your organization. So, for example, diverting food waste away from landfills, and making compost for local growers, right? And then you have your greater goals, your broad long-term intentions. So for example, to reduce air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions in the community, to fight food insecurity. That's entirely dependent on what you're doing. And then your project is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's going to be your project is gonna have expected outcomes. It's not going to solve the greater goals, but it's going to contribute towards the greater goals. And there's a way to think about how to think about the project, how to write about the project with the SMART objectives. So your project has to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So for example, picking up food scraps from a school cafeteria for the year and composting the food scraps for the school garden. So it comes out of your mission statement, it contributes towards your greater goals, but it's something that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, that the funder can back up and see results. So when you're thinking about impact, there's different ways as community composters that you can think about impact. So you can think about, for example, the amount of food scraps diverted from landfills, amount of compost produced, number of people attending workshops. It all depends on what your project is and who you're applying for funding from. And I found this amazing, I don't know if you're familiar with it already, but I found this amazing resource, the Food Waste Diversion Calculator. And let me see, I'm going to actually visit it. And I'm going to share the screen. Let me see, here we go. I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. Oops. Okay. So for example, pounds of food waste diverted, you could put 1,000. And then you have all this impact here that you can include in your grant if relevant. Maybe for some of you, number of meals made will be relevant. For some of you, it won't be. And then if you're wondering, where does that number come from? Here we have the sources and the formula. So how did they calculate? And it's all backed up with reliable sources. So I encourage you again to use the food waste diversion calculator when you're thinking about impact and when you're writing your grant. For example, the California Environmental Grassroots Fund, which is the grant that we're going to be looking at in more depth, they offer operating grants for 1 year. So you're going to be thinking about in that 1 year, how many pounds of food waste will be diverted, how many pounds of compost created, whatever is relevant to your project. All right. I'm just going to take a look at the chat. Okay, so Susan, does that answer your question? When you look at how does diverting food from landfills lead to number of meals made? So you click on that, what it showed, and then it shows there's it shows how they calculated, the sources they used and how they calculated those numbers. Okay, so gathering information from the funders. So we're looking again at the Rose Foundation, and just from their website, we're gonna, I'm looking at their website and I'm making an outline that's going to be useful for me as a community composter that's about to write a grant. So I'm trying to, like I mentioned earlier, put myself in the shoes of the funder and think about what they're looking for. So what do they care about? And the first thing in the header that I'm noticing here is Rose Foundation for Communities and Environment. There's some key words that I put here. Communities, environment. And then here on the other side, stewardship, community, justice. So I took all that information and I made this little outline in point form, which is very easy to read and a lot more clear, at least for me visually, than looking at their website and seeing all those words all bunched up together. And then in the about the fund, which is these 2 paragraphs from there, and I outlined where I got the information from, and I translated that into an easier to read point form. And I'm using the grantor's language. That's also important, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. I'm not only gathering information from the funder, I'm using their language. So in terms of eligibility, you'll see when you get the slides and you take a closer look, everything that I boxed in red here, I moved it to the side to make it more clear. And then here we have, oops, sorry about that. Here we have the eligibility criteria of the grant. And I gathered more of the information. A lot of the information in the eligibility criteria I already was able to pull out just from their website header and just from the short description of the grant. But there's other information in terms of eligibility that is additional here, and I just added it on. And again, I made a point form, very easy to read. So eligibility, priorities, which is very important. So community oriented plus larger goals. So they want, remember this slide that talked about perspective? They want to know that you're rooted in the community, but that you have these larger unattainable with one project only, right? These larger, broad goals, and that every single one of your projects is going to be a contribution towards these goals. They want to see that. They want to see the interconnectedness of climate crisis and social inequality. So again, those 3 kind of categories that we worked on in the whiteboard, they don't only want to see that that you're working towards addressing the climate crisis, they also want to see the porousness. They want to see the interconnection between the climate and social inequality. Again, here at the bottom, their priorities, climate resilience, and environmental justice. So I took a look very, very, very closely. And one of them, for example, is protecting natural biodiversity. So, okay, I know that composting promotes biodiversity in soil, but, I don't want to be the one who says it because I know it. So I took that, I did a quick Google search on composting protects natural biodiversity, and I got a wide range of really great resources. I chose one from the EPA, and here it is. Composting adds organic matter to the soil and increases the nutrient content and biodiversity of microbes in soil. So it's not me saying it, it's the EPA saying it. So every single one of their priorities, sustainable, equitable management of water resources, we can easily address those categories that we made earlier, and we can argue that our project is going to be doing that. Reimagining our food and transportation systems as well, we can easily address that. So I'm gathering information from the funder, and here's the summary from the 2 pages. I'm gathering information from the funder. I'm using the language of the funder, and I'm going to be using this to guide what I write about, what I emphasize, and how I write about it. Does anybody have any questions? All right. I'll keep going. And that information that you gathered from the funder is this here, right? Guidelines, eligibility, emphasis, purpose. And then you're going to go back to your mission statement, to your project, to your points, and you're going to make those match as best you can. And then you're going to get ready to write. So notice we haven't even started writing the grant yet. So what are the next steps? You've gathered all this material, you found the perfect funder, you tried to put yourself in their shoes, you gathered all, your information. Then now you're going to look at the questions. You're going to look at all the questions one by one. You're not going to start writing yet. You're going to look at the questions in the order that they are written, because there's a reason why the funder put the questions in a certain order. So you're going to take a look at all the questions, and you're going to try to think about how you're going to answer them, but you're not going to start writing yet. You're going to try to imagine a narrative or a flow that comes from your mission statement and your project and your angles, and how that can flow in the order that the questions from the funder are given. And then a lot of grant applications, you have to log into a portal and you have to work on them online. I recommend, and I can't emphasize enough, that it's so much easier and so much better to just copy the questions down and open up a separate file, a Word document or whatever, copy the questions down for you to be able to work on them offline. And once you're done the process and you have the final answers, then you're going to log into the portal, and then you're going to copy paste them from your document onto the portal. And now, after you've done all that, we can start with the writing. But I think maybe I'm going to open it up to see if anybody has any questions, and maybe this could be a good time to take a little bit, to take a break. What do you think, Courtney?
Absolutely. We'll take questions. We are going to take a break from 10 10:30 to 10:45. So we
Okay.
can take about 10 minutes of questions.
Okay.
Some of the information that was dropped into the chat while you were going on about the linear process of the non-linear process of
Yeah.
grant writing were some places that are kind of like watchdog organizations that will compile the list of active awards or active RFPs, a focus on community foundations, some on state level grants, some are national. But these are just resources that we're dropping. Again, we'll put all of this
Hmm.
to a nice attachment in a document for you. But this is just if people want to take the time also to look through any of these and see if they can find an example that they actually want to walk through from reading mission statements, checking out eligibility, looking at the timeline, and then reviewing the questions. It doesn't actually have to be one that you're going to go for, just opening one and going through the process as an example and for practice. So we do have one question so far from Susan. Oh, I think you answered it. How does diverting food from landfill lead to a number of meals made? Um, and the sources or right there on Compost Now,
Hmm.
how they're calculating that. Of course, we have our own compost calculator, which comes out, it goes in weight and comes out in volume. So ours is a little bit different. Theirs goes in weight and comes out in weight.
Okay.
Um, mhm. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying, oh, that's wonderful. It's also wonderful.
And Bianca, a seasoned veteran of the nonprofit world, just has a comment that says she wished she had this when she started our organization 6 years ago. So thank you, Bianca.
Oh, thank you for that.
It really is here because we know a lot of the groups that are starting out are either being fiscally sponsored or you all are sole proprietors right now in order to be able to do these projects, or you're part of schools and foundations that need to seek additional funding from other foundations. So we understand that maybe 80% of the people working with us are really where you were 6 years ago, Bianca. So we're hoping that they get this right on time. We have a question from Beryl that says, how do you decide whether it is worth it for your client to compete for a federal grant or not?
Answer would be just eligibility. You look closely at the eligibility and see if it would be a good fit or not. But maybe Lindsay has some more input or.
Can briefly say, I think it's definitely on the lines of eligibility, including award size. Sometimes they're really big. Can you handle a budget that big? And then having the right partnerships in place, because a lot of the federal awards are, at least the ones right now, are collaborative. And we are going to go in depth into the community change grants next week, and how to look through the different eligibility and also just application requirements, which are hefty. Um, and so not having the right partnerships or having done that work ahead of time. I mean, really, it's how ready are you to do that application and to use the award, is the short answer.
Mhm. Right, and then I see Paula. When you're trying to get funded, do you try with different funders and try to fit their requirements from different angles depending on them? Or do you just choose the funders that fit your goals, but having less funders that could fund you? My advice would be to try to find different funders, not necessarily fit their requirements, but I think those three broad categories are useful. So, for example, you could apply for environmental grants, like in the search that I did earlier, that I looked for small environmental grants, California, right? So you could, those three categories that we worked on earlier, kind of, they give you an in to apply for environmental grants, for education or community building grants. I could have put small community grants, California, in my search, and I would have had maybe another list of funders, or equity and health. So you will, it's not like you're going to try to find any random funder and try to fit their requirements, but that's why it's good to have these broad categories, because then it even helps you gain perspective on how to think about your own projects, and then you can see that how they can fit into the missions and values of different funding bodies. Does that make sense? Because if you're just looking for environmental grants, for example, you're going to miss out on some of the other grants that you could also be eligible for. And maybe it's just a matter of wording from the funders, but you could actually, and that's why I insisted earlier that, the project should be clear, your mission should be clear, but there's also needs to be some kind of flexibility, right? So you can apply, you can have a certain project, you can have a project, for example, that's, picking up food scraps from the school cafeteria and composting them to be used in the school garden. And, maybe you can apply for an environmental grant with that project. You can apply for an education grant for that project. You could apply for an equity grant from that project. And you can make sense, great. And you can, that's why it's good to think about the different angles. So you can kind of work and find the funder that way and give them what they're looking for. Does anybody have any other questions? Bianca, one of my biggest challenges is the lack of education around community composting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
On camera, I'm kind of running around, but
Hello.
I think thank you so much for this. I think that I don't think that people know what community composting is. I think it's a very underfunded sector. People are aware of like what composting is, sustainability, these kind of hot terms, but not really sure about what these composting locations are doing and why it's important. And so, the moments to be able to talk about it, it's like, they're like sound bites, and it's hard to like, yeah, maybe I just need help developing more language around it. And maybe it's getting more people to these sites and things like that. But when people think about sustainability and they're thinking about GHG emission numbers, and these kinds of things, and what education could look like, I just don't think that a lot of policymakers and organizations and companies and the broader community are seeing enough. I have visited these sites, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's super underground is what it feels like.
And how has that affected your like grant writing, or is it how?
I have besides this grant with Kath, I have never written a specific grant for the community composting. It's always been an aspect of other programming. And so that's how I've been able to support it all these years.
I wonder then if, it could be a good idea to look for education grants and make that argument that you're making. And explain why it's important and why there should be you know, more educational resources or more educational emphasis available. And you
Yeah.
can use those three categories to kind of back up the educational component and focus on that. I mean, I think it's really important if it's something that you think is lacking, then that's the perfect way to get, you know, to apply for funding, you know, to find these resources that are missing
Mm.
and focus on that angle. Because maybe a lot of people are applying for environmental grants, and maybe there's not a lot of people applying for education grants. And that could be in your favor. Because, you know, a lot of funders, and we're going to get to that a little bit later, they have no idea of how important composting is.
Mm.
Right. So maybe this is an opportunity for you to look for education grants and explain why it's so important and how it also connects to these other two categories that I think further the mission of, you know, every funder really, or almost every funder, right? The environment, education, and equity. So you're just putting education in the foreground, but then you're backing it up with all of this too.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And it makes me think about, I was reading what you were talking about, the vision statements, Courtney, in the chat. That seems like a good idea. And then also, you know, maybe just writing in for communications, you know, photography, social media, videography, and like this sort of storytelling around it. So that helps me think about it. Thank you.
Right.
I am going to turn the microphone back over to Ximena, and we are going to jump into the rest of this presentation and some more group activities.
Hi. Yeah, maybe we can start with a group activity, just opening up, you know, the platform to everybody to see if anybody has any questions, if anybody had something that they did. People join the breakout rooms after all, or yes, it's something that was brought up in the breakout rooms before we continue. So you can just put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, however you'd like. We've been talking about how to get ready for the writing. It's been almost 2 hours, and we haven't even talked about writing the actual grant yet. And that's it shows how much preparation needs to be put in, right? How that non-linear process that I was talking about earlier, how if we just find you know, a funder and take a look at the grant applications and we just sit down with that, it can be really overwhelming. I know grant writing can be really intimidating for a lot of people, you know, people even with a lot of experience. And I think that, and I hope that having all of this preliminary material ready to go and, you know, thinking about it from a certain perspective can really, really, really make your lives easier. And again, like one of my first slides mentioned, expect confusion, expect uncertainty, and just keep going. Just keep going, because you know, every grant is worth it. The work is really, really worth it. No matter how hard it seems, just keep going. And yeah. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the writing part. And you're going to write. You've gathered all the materials, you found your funder, you put yourself in their shoes, you did the chart where you know exactly what they're looking for with their language. And then you're going to start thinking about your first draft. You're going to assemble all your puzzle pieces. You're going to use all your work. And you're just going to start writing. Don't worry at this point about word count. Don't worry about repeating yourself. Don't worry about anything. Just write. All that other part comes after in the editing. And again, and I can't emphasize this enough, try to use the grantor's language. Try to give them exactly what they're looking for. So some writing tips. You're going to want to start with a hook to pique the reader's interest. And I think, as we were mentioning earlier, a lot of funders have no idea how important composting is, how important community composting projects are on so many levels. So, you know, you're going to start with a hook. The hook could be a summary of the problem you're trying to address, or just an intriguing fact. So, and you're always going to want, if you're going to start with a shocking fact, shocking again to people who, you know, aren't experts in community composting, you're going to want to make sure that that fact is backed up, right? So if you're going to say that 33% of all food in the United States goes uneaten, you don't want anybody thinking, oh, come on, that can't be true. You want to back that up, and you want to back it up with good sources. But this is a really good hook, because, you know, when I started learning about community composting, I couldn't believe how much food goes to waste. I couldn't believe how important composting is, and these community projects are on so many levels. So you want to start with a strong hook. And I have 3 examples here. I'll just read them. So according to the EPA, about 33% of all food in the United States does not get eaten. A recent report estimated that about 96% of households' wasted food ended up in landfills, combustion facilities, or down the drain to the sewer system in 2019. So, and there's my source, right, to back it up. So I have a little bit there in quotation marks, as you see, which is what I copy pasted from the source. And then the other part I kind of paraphrased, right? Because I don't want to start my grant application with somebody else's words. I don't want to start my grant application with a direct quote. So what I did was I took the information from the source, I paraphrased a little bit, and I had a direct quote for the rest. Another hook, for example, Calorie Cycle estimates that almost 6 million tons of food waste or food scraps are thrown out by Californians every year. That's shocking. I mean, a lot of grantors are going to be shocked, and they're going to be interested. They're going to want to read more. So always start with a hook. And the hooks don't necessarily have to address a problem. The hook can be something positive, right? The hook can be like the third example. EPA studies have demonstrated that composting is one of the most powerful actions we can take to reduce trash in landfills, address climate change, and build healthy soil. So this is also for people who aren't experts or don't have a lot of experience with composting. It's going to really pique their interest, right? A lot of, a lot of people that are concerned about climate change, that have heard about composting, but don't really understand, how it can be beneficial on so many levels. They're going to be shocked, and they're going to want to know more about your project. So maybe we can start an exercise. We can take maybe 10 minutes. Courtney, if you don't mind, starting a whiteboard where people can contribute some strong opening sentences, some strong hooks. So feel free to have a look at that document that I from that I provided earlier. I'm also going to put a couple of other links. Here we go. So in the chat, here's a few links. And just some strong kind of hooks, a strong opening sentence that basically summarizes why your project is important and that is going to pique people's interest and, you know, want them to learn more. No, I was just hoping we could take a little look at what people contributed.
Sure, we've got imagine transforming the 40% of food waste that currently overwhelms our landfills into nutrient-rich compost through community-driven initiatives, not only alleviating the burden of our waste management systems, but also educating and empowering our community to cultivate I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Yeah.
Brighter world, a more joyful world, a healthier world. There's a lot of different ways you could end that, but most
That's
people
excellent. Pardon me?
Most people see and feel climate change, but are unsure how to make a difference. So yeah, community composting can be seen as a really easy way to pitch in and feel like you're contributing to part of the greater common good and the collective action that we really need to be seeing in order to help solve this crisis. Did you know that almost 20% of what California sends to landfills is food that can be composted and made to healthy soil? The fact was actually 1 out of 4 people in California are food insecure, not 4 out of 5. Sorry, it's 20%, not 80%.
Right.
Um,
It's still an incredibly high number.
we have methane emissions from landfills contribute XX% to the total GHG gases released annually in California. This statistics to fill in the XX is actually being studied right now, coming out from the EPA to monitor methane pollution at landfills. So I'm sure that that actual percentage is a number that we can find now. EPA studies have demonstrated that composting is, quote, one of the most powerful actions we can take to reduce trash in landfills, address climate change, and build healthy soil, end quote.
That's one from my example, but
Did you know that 80% of methane is released during decomposition happens during the first 7 days? That means that while your food waste sits in your green bin in your garage for a week and then goes to a transfer station and then finally makes it to a commercial composting site, most of the GHG damage has already been done.
that's an excellent lead for an argument for a community composting project too.
Also for keeping your food material in your freezer until you're ready to compost.
Yeah, yeah.
It also helps break down cellulose. There's many benefits to it. According to the EPA, about 33% of all food in the United States does not get eaten. A recent report estimated that about 96% of households' wasted food ended up in the landfills, combustion facilities, or down the drain. I think we already read that one.
Yeah, that was. Did you read this green one?
I did.
Okay.
Landfilling food scraps produces 20 times the CO2 emissions as composting, and when used, compost net emissions become negative.
Excellent.
I like that one because it's very solution oriented, like it
Mm-hmm.
doomsday, but saying there's another way we could do it that's actually going to get over that problem, but provide a benefit as well.
And you can contribute directly. you know, to be part of the solution.
Oops, I think I missed this one.
That's what I love about community composting projects, because so many people are so overwhelmed by the enormity of, you know, climate change, that, you know, being able to, you know, be part of the solution is so important. And especially around education and community and youth.
So this one reads, did you know that it will cost Californian cities $400 million in the first year to implement SB 1383 regulations, and up to 20 billion in the next 10 years to build enough capacity to meet that landfill diversion target? And that none of these facilities are finished yet. I'll finish the sentence for them. Oh, and we're still going to be years behind schedule, just with the permitting process of those large scale facilities. So it's a real boost for community composting that's low cost, low infrastructure, can get up and running in less than 6 months and start providing immediate capacity for their communities, as well as the other myriad community co-benefits, jobs, food, and gathering spaces, community green spaces, and joy.
Yeah, joy is so important.
Did I miss anybody?
So these are great. I mean, you're presenting, you know, a lot of these present these shocking statistics, but then you're following up with a solution or a contribution towards a solution that meets all the requirements of, you know, most of these funders, if not all of these funders. I never like to generalize, but I would say all of these funders, right? So through composting, you know, you're providing solutions for the mission statements of the funders. So this is a great way to start your application with these hooks. All right. Play from current slide. Great. Okay, so then you have all the ideas in your head and you want to know how to put them down as effectively as possible on the piece of paper or on the online, on the application. So again, you're going to be rooted in your project, but you're, as much as possible, you're going to be putting yourself in the shoes of the funder. You're going to try to think like the funder. So you're going to assume that people are just kind of, you know, going through a lot of applications. You want to make your application as easy to read as possible. You want to make it skimmable, right? Because a lot of people, they just don't have the capacity when they're reviewing a lot of applications to go through every single detail. So you want your points to stand out. You want to be as concise as possible, just like in your mission statement. You want to be as accessible as possible, right? So use clear, concise language. Don't use slang. And avoid like overly complicated words, spell out acronyms, just basic kind of basic exercise in clarity, and assuming that the people who are going to be reading your application don't know anything about your project or about composting itself. It's a good idea to use the active voice instead of the passive voice. So for example, XYZ composting will pick up food scraps from this cafeteria. Instead of, food scraps will be picked up by XYZ composting from this cafeteria. So the active voice, just, it gives a different impression in that your organization is, you know, ready to take action.
Ximena, I love this one. I correct this often in our progress reports. Can you go deeper into what is active voice and what is passive voice? I'm not sure a lot of people understand that difference.
Okay. Well, the passive voice, for example, is the second one. So food scraps will be picked up. So you only find out about what your organization is doing in the middle of the sentence. And it's the impression is that, you know, anybody could do it. It's a lot stronger to use the active voice, right? Which is the first sentence saying that, you know, your organization will pick up food scraps. So it's your organization taking action as opposed to the food scraps are going to be picked up. Does that make sense?
Excellent. Yeah, just focusing on that you're the doer and that you actions instead of there's an action that's been done by somebody, because then you get lost at the end of the sentence. So just
Exactly.
right up there
Exactly.
as the actor.
Yeah, and if it's in the passive voice as well, you not only introduce your organization in the middle of the sentence, your organization could be easily replaced. You know, food scraps will be picked up. If it's not me, it's going to be somebody else. Whereas the active voice is, you know, our organization is going to be picking up food scraps. So is, like Courtney mentioned, is the actor. It's just a lot stronger. It's a stronger way of addressing a grant application, of writing an application in which you're proposing a project. Another one, avoid unnecessary adjectives. So our wonderful program, you don't really want to use adjectives like that. Whereas you can use other adjectives like our innovative program. Wonderful program, it's my personal opinion. Whereas our innovative program, it can lead to, you know, the next sentence, which is me talking about how it's innovative. So it's not necessarily my personal opinion. It's something that's relevant, that grantors are going to find relevant. Again, stick to facts and back them up with reliable resources, especially if you're going to be using like some of those hooks that are going to shock people. You don't want to waste time or their time in having them doubt what you're saying. You know, and had them thinking, oh, says who? 1 in 4 Californians, you know, go through food insecurity. That can't be true. So you want to just avoid those doubts, and you want to stick to the facts, and you want to back them up with reliable resources. And reliable is also a key word here. If you're going to use a source, you have to use a source that people are going to take seriously. People, again, aren't going to have doubts, because if people are having doubts with about what you're saying, it takes away from the focus of your project and your application and its importance. So you want to avoid all of that. Okay. Again, avoid judgments and opinions. Avoid too much emotion. So I have 2 examples here. One of them, it's horrible how so many government initiatives ignore the most marginalized communities. These communities are always the ones that suffer the most, and that's unfair. So you can say the same thing in a different way that the grantor is going to understand that supporting your project is going to mean furthering their mission statement, whether it be focused on the environment, focused on community and education, or focused on health and equity. So here's how I paraphrased that sentiment in a more kind of grant-friendly way. So XYZ composting will serve this particular neighborhood, a low-income area with a population of whatever, that falls outside the zone being served by the municipal composting program. An April 2024 study conducted by the Institute of Local Self-Reliance demonstrates how community composting programs offer, quote, an alternative path to wasting that can shift the trash paradigm, rescue organic resources, and build soil health, end of quote, while, quote, breaking dependence on landfills and incinerators, disproportionately harming low-income and BIPOC communities. So I'm saying basically the exact same thing, but I'm taking out the judgment, the opinion, and the emotion. And I'm backing it up with sources, and I'm demonstrating to the funding body, to the grantor, that I know what I'm talking about. I've done the research. I've found a need in the community, and this is the proof, and this is how I'm going to address it, and this is why it's important. So overall, the application should convey a sense of commitment, you know, the accountability, thoughtfulness, responsibility, and especially viability, right? They want to know that if they're funding you, you're going to be able to follow through on the project. They're going to know that the project is viable and that you're the right organization to implement it. And finally, the final document should have a cohesive voice. So you can have, you know, people from, you know, several people that contribute to the document, but the final grant application should have a cohesive voice. So the writing style, it's probably best for one person to, you know, have their cohesive writing style throughout. It's just easier to read, easier to understand. And it also says a lot about your organization in terms of thoughtfulness, viability, and all that. Oh, I'm gonna just take a peek at the chat. Okay, great. Great. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So then you've written your draft and you're gonna edit. As you can see, you know, this takes a lot of time. So give yourselves a lot of time before the deadline. Don't save the writing for the very end. So time to edit. You're going to read, reread, and reread. You're going to see if you're repeating information, can you be more concise? And this all goes back to making your application easy to read, having your audience in mind, your reader in mind, assuming that they're not experts, and that they're that they're tired, that they're probably reading a lot of applications. So are you repeating yourself? Can you be more concise? Are you saying everything you want to say? Because you can find ways to say whatever you want to say, and stick to the question. So if you're applying for, you know, a grant, an education grant, for example, and you want to talk about why compost education is so important, you're going to have your outlines where you write it all down in point form. Remember those document that we worked on at the very beginning? And you're going to want to make sure that you're saying as much as you want to say, that you're not leaving anything out. And then that comes into your editing, the editing process of the grant. So maybe you find that you're repeating yourself and that, okay, but I didn't say this, so I can take this fact and put it here. Again, so are you repeating words unnecessarily? Do you need synonyms? And this is when you'll go over the word count, all the fine details that you're not going to worry about at the beginning when you're writing your first draft and you're just getting your ideas down. Can you remove some words without removing ideas? There's little tricks, right? There's like contractions, for example. I use that a lot. Instead of it is, it's. Or sometimes you have sentences that, you can remove a few things here and there without compromising the impact. Does the writing flow? When you reread your application in the editing process, you're going to imagine a voice reading it. And you want to try to make that voice flow as much as possible. And then you can get feedback from colleagues. Lindsay and I are going to have our office hours. Have somebody else read it. Do they understand what you're trying to say? So writing style really does matter. Susan, clunkiness jumps out at you if you actually read things out loud. Exactly. Exactly. So you're going to want to read with a voice in your head or out loud.
Or have
But notice the clunk. Pardon me?
or have someone who read it to you out loud.
Exactly, exactly.
And this is just a short plug to remember that Ximena will be available to us through January 2024 for regional collaboration for office hours. So if there's a grant in a region that could apply to a lot of people, to working together to create applications, and Ximena can help provide feedback. Ximena can't write it for you, but will be a resource to say, do exactly that. Read it out loud back to you. So
Yeah, I won't be able to write it for you, but I can for sure give you suggestions, feedback, and yeah, areas of, little details on what to focus on, or yes. Okay. The budget. So this is an important one too. So you're going to be calculating your cost of labor, a few different ways to calculate it. Could be just, asking around to organizations that are doing things similar to you. You can use the local minimum wage or living wage calculator as a reference. If you're not keeping track of, if you're a new organization or you're just starting out, and you can start keeping track of how much you and your team and your volunteers work if you're not doing so already. If relevant, you're going to calculate vehicle use and mileage, and here's some resources for that. And then you're going to be adjusting the numbers to the grant amount that you're applying for. Is it true? I'm reading Justine in the chat. Is it true that grants look for keywords in applications? That's a good question. I would say that my answer to this question would be that would be yes. And this is why it's so important to go through the grant itself and the funders website with as much detail as you possibly can, and you're going to want to use their language. So that outline from one of the previous slides, where I extracted the information from the Rose Foundation, and I made like a point form kind of summary I'm going to use that in my grant application. So their language is reflected back to them. And I think, I hope that answers your questions. To me, those are the key words. To use their language and reflect back to them what they're looking for. So budget. This is the budget for the California Grassroots Environmental Fund. And again, the maximum amount for this fund is $7,500, and it's the duration is a year. And this is their budget. It's a very simple budget. It's perfect for organizations that are just starting out. And so yeah, and I'm going to provide also a resource later. They have a lot of information. They really want new applicants to apply. So they have a web page with details on exactly how to fill out the budget as well. And I took a screenshot, so you can't really see, but this last column, which is current year budget, income, and expenses for project, is optional, because what they're offering is the 1-year operation grant. So you don't even need a project grant for this. I mean, if it was me writing the grant, I would include it anyway. Any optional material, I would fill it out and include it anyway. But it is optional. So this is what the budget for this particular grant looks like. Some grants are going to ask for a budget narrative. But budget narrative basically explains the expenses listed in the budget categories. So if the Rose Foundation grant required a budget narrative, I would have filled out the budget categories in the last slide, and then I would explain them. I'm not going to read this example, but you can look at it later. And they talk about FTEs, right? So someone is going to work 0.05 FTEs. So here's a resource on calculating and understanding FTEs, full-time equivalents. And maybe Lindsay is going to be covering this in more depth next week, but that's the budget narrative and an example and how to calculate the FTEs. So deadlines. Give yourself lots of time. Like, no matter how experienced you are, just make sure you give yourself lots of time for editing. If you need to gather letters from partners, if you need anything you need, just give yourself lots and lots and lots of time. Set goals. So you're going to look at the grant application, the application deadline, and you're going to work backwards from there, right? You have this deadline to submit the grant. So from today, what am I going to do? So you're going to want to set goals every week, and it's okay. Even if you don't always meet these goals, you're going to set them. You're going to have some guidelines. And for the particular grant, the California Grassroots Environmental Grant, the deadlines, they have 3 deadlines every year: February 1st, June 1st, and October 1st. So if anybody wants to apply for this fund, I think you can start now for the October 1st deadline, gathering all the materials, all the preliminary tags, boilerplate, and start now. And if you don't make it for the October deadline, you always have the February deadline as well. All right, so before I go to the next slide, and we're almost at the end of my presentation, and then I'm going to want to open it up, and maybe we can do some of those exercises that we that we didn't get around to before, maybe you can take a little bit of time to look for a funder and take a look at applications. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about what we've looked at so far before I move forward. So I'm just going to take a peek at the chat. Great. All right. Perfect. Okay, and I see Lindsay is going to be diving into the FTEs next week, which is perfect. And Courtney, of course, has an excellent resource. All right, great. Okay, so here is some information about the California Grassroots Environmental Grant. There's some links to the page, the deadlines, the duration. There's information on how to apply. I mean, I love this grant so much because they make it so accessible for everybody. They want people to apply. They want new organizations to apply, and they try to make it as accessible as possible. You can even write the application in Spanish. So here is a series of links. They how to apply. There's the questions, they offer them there. Maybe we can have a little look at the questions. So I'm going to, here, let's open this up. And I will share the window. So stop. Is it here? Is it this one? Okay, there we go. So here's the application for the California Environmental Grassroots Fund. A lot of this information. I'm just looking at the first hint for applicants. Remember to save your application as you work. You will automatically be timed out of the system after 90 minutes for security reasons. This is why I always recommend when you have the questions, you copy them, you paste them in a separate document for you to work offline. And for you to write, if there's a word count, sometimes in applications, if you're online, if there's a word count of, I don't know, 4,000 words, and you're just writing your draft and you're just fleshing out your ideas and you're writing more than 4,000 words, there comes a point where you can't type anymore. So always, for several reasons, I recommend copying the questions and pasting them into a separate document. So look, there's all this amazing information. And then here you can write it in Spanish. Si prefiere completar su solicitud en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a grants@rosefoundation.org. And here's the application and the questions. The project name, and it says here, just enter general support. So that's an easy one. The short summary, and this is also why practicing concise writing is so important, right? In 1 or 2 sentences, please describe your work as if this was the only thing someone would read. So I think it's such an important exercise to, when you have your mission statement or your project, you should be able to write down your project in 5,000 words, and you should also be able to kind of be concise and write your project down in, a maximum of 600 characters in 1 or 2 sentences. So both. So, and then this is all very straightforward, which is what I love about this grant and what I thought it would be a perfect example. Tax status, If your group's tax status is other, please explain. So again, the barriers here are very low. They want to give everybody an opportunity to apply. California county or county served. Areas of emphasis, choose up to 3. And this, you can go back to those lists that we made earlier, right? Those buckets that we made earlier. So, you know, you can choose the 3 that you want. And if this was me writing the grant, I would go back to the outline that I made when I was looking at the website, and I would take a look at what exactly, in what order of priority. If I have more than 3 categories that I want to check, I would look at go back and look at the order in their priority, and I would choose those. So always going back to them and seeing what they want. So again, for community composters, if you look at these categories, and it's perfect. It's a perfect fit. And then organizational information. Tell us who you are. Please describe your group's purpose, current activities, most important accomplishments, and what issues are you trying to address and why they're important. Again, you're just going to write, and then you're going to edit them later. Community served. Photos, medias, or attachments, optional but appreciated. Then you're going to want to do it. You want to go the extra step, and you want to provide that for them.
Pausing for 1 second, Ximena, we're getting some feedback in the chat that your screen is frozen. That when you scroll in your document, that the audience is not seeing the same thing.
Oh. Okay. What about now?
Yes, I can see you scroll now.
Yes? Okay. So I'm not sure where it cut off, but let me see. Okay, so maybe I'm scrolling too fast. Here I am. Okay, so the grant request, your work plan, your community involvement and outreach. So you're going to be using all of the information that you gathered from them, all the information that you prepared yourself, and you're just going to make that perfect fit between your project and what they want. So here's an example of some questions, and then they're going to want to know about your employees, board list, who's involved, and then your financial information, which is basically that budget template that that we looked at earlier. And like I mentioned, they even have instructions on walking you step by step on what they're looking for and how to complete the budget. Yeah. So this is this grant application. And then finally, letters of support, optional. If it's optional, do it. Give them letters of support. And then feedback. I always love these, you know, they always, no matter what grant you apply for. How long did it take you, you know, to complete the application? And there's always the 0 to 5 hours. And it's like, I don't know who takes 0 to 5 hours, but, so yeah, so there's an example of, oops, sorry. There we go. There's an example of, in detail, of the California Grassroots Environmental Fund grant. And here you'll see later on the PowerPoint, when you receive this, you can follow all these links and you can look in details. Here's tips for applicants, current and past grantees, which is always useful. And I took a look, and they haven't funded community composting projects recently, so it's perfect timing for you to apply for this. Okay, and then I have some additional resources, but first, I want to open up the chat and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, frozen screen. Great. So what is expected from a letter of support? That's a good question. Does anybody want to suggest anything? What do you think that if you put yourself in the grantor's shoes, why do you think they want letters of support? What do you think a letter of support should include? And you can just type it in the chat. And why do you think that it's important to get letters of support? Yeah, perfect. Excellent. Wonderful. Some great answers. Yeah, basically, they want to know that your organization is connected to the community, connected with other organizations. And what we were talking about earlier about, you know, commitment, viability, and just that if they fund you, they have a guarantee that you will be able to deliver what you promised, and you will be able to help them further their mission. And that it's not just you alone doing something. Yes. Justine.
Hi, I'm better at speaking than typing right now.
Okay.
With the letter of support and partnership, in the past, I've worked with organizations applying for federal grants, and I noticed that if they lacked in an area of the application, they used their partnership to make up for that. And I was surprised that it was successful. And so I was wondering, like, how your experience of that, like, if the organization wasn't specifically as focusing on socially disadvantaged individuals, then they would partner with another organization to help get that qualification for the grant. Is that, like, do you recommend um, these grants that you're talking about here are smaller, so I'm not sure if you recommend doing that for these small grants, but like, I guess if a grant is if it's not specifically for composting, um, partnering with other organizations to maybe meet their wider requirements, would you recommend that?
Yeah, 100%, because it goes down to viability, right? It guarantees that you have partners, that you have committed and formal partnerships with other organizations that will make the project viable. I mean, you're right. In this small grant, you know, it's more about they want to know that who they're funding, right? If it's a small organization or someone who's just started out, again, viability. They want to know that this person or this organization has connections in the community, that they're not just starting out, right? That they have support. But in the case of larger grants, like what you're talking about, yeah, these letters of support, if it's not a composting focused grant, can also guarantee viability of your project just because of who you're partnered with.
And then my last question to you would be, I've noticed in the many years that I've been working in the nonprofit world, I've kind of gone out of that now and went to a more sole proprietorship, but it was super hard to get a grant as a startup. The grants always went to organizations that were 5 years or older. And I was wondering if you had any tips or tricks of how to get beginning projects to win grants against organizations that are 5 years or older.
Well, I would say tips and tricks. It is a great question. Tips and tricks, I would say, just again, to look closely at the eligibility. I don't know if Lindsay has anything else to contribute, but you know, there's maybe if there's grants where that are more open, like this one, but maybe, you know, that's more at your level or at your level of experience. Lindsay, do you have anything you want to pitch in for a startup? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, on my end it didn't show mute, so I'm so sorry. And I also just was the last time I just dove into speaking, so I did want to say hi everyone. I'm Lindsay. Thank you for introducing me, Courtney. I think I got nervous, but yes, I will be doing the workshop next week. I think that there are grants that really tailor to seed and startup, startups, and it's not a very helpful answer, but and sometimes that's one way to sort of weed through that. I think that goes into, I mean, this is one, I'm going to go into a lot of other ways to continue to search for grants, to kind of some of the other search words as well as keywords, what they're looking for. It might just be that there is sort of a certain type of foundations that are really looking to fund really brand new projects and to really do a targeted search for some of those. It's a short answer. I don't know if I'm reading what Courtney wrote as well. Is there anything else about the question? I apologize if
I would just jump in and say, focus on what sets you apart. So really honing in on those strengths that make your project so unique, whether that be it's innovative, stepping away from what all these other organizations who are 5 years or more established have already been doing. So what is it that you're going to do differently that is going to have that jump in impact? What are you going to do it faster? Are you going to do it more holistically? Are you going to reach a larger amount of beneficiaries for that same amount of money? So this is where those adjective words don't get wasted in things that are flowery, like wonderful project, but a faster or a project that can increase the amount of beneficiaries by 500% for the same amount of cost, for example. So using adjectives that really hone in on what makes you so unique and special, and most importantly, more impactful than somebody that's already been established. That could be your partnerships, that could be your strategy, what we like to refer to in these jargon words as theory of change. So how do you think you're going to change the world, and how is that different than how everybody else has been trying to change the world already? And Ximena, you're on mute.
Hello. Yes, great answers. Okay, finally we have just a few minutes left, and my last couple of slides are just resources. So Here are some resources for you. The first one, of course, is the California Alliance for Community Composting. Take advantage of their grant support resources. Take advantage of my office hours. Take advantage of Lindsay's office hours. We're here to help. We're here to give you feedback. Please, please, please take advantage of that. And then here's a list of other small grants that I found that may or may not be relevant. Here is, I wanted to point out the foundation directory of candid.org. And if you go online, it's a paid subscription. But if you go to one of their community partners, and here is the link, everything that they offer is free. So take a look at this link to see if there's any community partners near you, and you can access this directory for free. And here's a few other grants you can take a look at. And then once you're in, once you've found a grant, once, you're on the website, you'll often find connections, right? You'll often find other funders. Additional resources, again, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Here is that document that I posted, and then here you can see, again, small composting grants that they have awarded recently, and it can give you an idea of successful projects, and also maybe it can help your project become a little more flexible in those initial stages when you're doing your whole boilerplate and all the preliminary work. It can help you kind of hone in and just give you ideas. Environmental Protection Agency, CalRecycle, and that is it. Something else that I wanted to point out, and I don't know where it is, but the Rose Foundation, they have on their website a list of the funders. And I thought I'd put it here. I'm gonna look for it and I'll add it on the PowerPoint. Oh, here it is. Funding Partners, California Environmental Grassroots Fund. So take a look. If you follow that link, I'm going to show you. Here we go. You'll be able to find all of these other funding bodies that work with the Rose Foundation and the California Environmental Grassroots Fund. So if you're looking for a funder, just follow all these grants and all these links and see if any of these could be a good fit for you. So if anybody has any questions in these few minutes that we have left? Yeah, like Courtney mentioned, please raise your hand or put it in the chat.
My question is, how many people are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of resources that have been given to you today? We want to know if we're doing our job correctly. Feeling just right. Feeling empowered. Feeling just right.
Good. I like that.
Excellent. So the purpose was to offer you enough to get you hooked, and offer you enough to make you feel more confident than when you walked in, and also offer you enough to get that sense of being overwhelmed, which is very much a part of this grant writing process. So we're going to follow up with all of these overwhelming resources too, in the written form. So you will have access to all of it, the chat, the whiteboards, the presentation. Presentation will also be translated into Spanish so we can share it with other folks that are within your community that would like to access these free resources as well. And then we'll also post it again, like I said, on our YouTube channel. If we don't have any more questions, I would love to give a wonderful round of applause to Ximena today for walking us through what seemingly is a mind-boggling process. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.